I've told this story maybe 4 times in my life, twice sober. And every time I get to the part where the commander walks into that armory, every single time somebody stops me and says, "Come on, Boone. That didn't happen." It happened. I was standing 11 feet from him. I was holding a boar brush and a cup of coffee that had gone cold about 40 minutes earlier, and I watched a man who had done things I will never be cleared to know about. I watched him look at a rifle on a workbench and go the color of wet paper. He didn't say a word. That's the thing people don't understand. He didn't yell. He didn't drop anything. He just stopped breathing for a second, like the room had taken something from him. Let me back up. You need the island first. Without the island, none of it makes sense, Adak. If you've never heard of it, don't feel bad. Most sailors haven't. It's a lump of black rock and green muskeg out at the tail end of the Aleutians, 1,200 miles southwest of Anchorage, sitting in the exact spot where the Bering Sea and the Pacific meet up and argue about it forever. There's a sign on the road from the airfield. Somebody put it up decades ago, back when Adak had 5,000 people, and a bowling alley and a McDonald's, and a high school with a basketball team. It says, "Welcome to Adak, birthplace of the winds." They weren't being poetic. That's a weather term, that's a fact. By the time I got stationed there, winter of my second enlistment, 22 years old, gunner's mate 3rd class, Elias Boone out of Poplar Bluff, Missouri, the town was mostly gone. A few dozen people. The Navy had pulled out in '97 and left behind a whole city that nobody wanted. Rows of empty houses with the windows blown in. A school with the doors chained. Street signs pointing to streets where nobody had driven in 20 years. You'd walk through it in the fog and it would get in your chest. All those kitchens. All those living rooms where somebody's mom yelled at somebody's kid to take his boots off. Just wind in them now. We had a detachment there. Officially, it was a cold weather ordnance and marksmanship facility, which is a long way of saying. A couple of buildings, a range that ran out along Kuluk Bay, an armory, a galley, a shop, and about 19 of us keeping the lights on so that 4 or 5 times a year, real operators could fly out and get their teeth kicked in by weather. That was the point of the place. Adak doesn't have terrain that'll kill you. It has air that'll kill you. 50-knot wind is a Tuesday. The fog comes in horizontal. You can be standing on a ridge with a clear view of Mount Moffett, and 11 minutes later you can't see your own boots. Guys came out there to learn how to shoot in that, to learn how to live in that. And I fixed their rifles. That was my job. Chief Prout ran the armory and I was his whole department. Chief Wade Prout, 31 years in, hands like a catcher's mitt, a coffee mug that said World's OKAYESD grandpa that he was extremely serious about. He'd been at Adak 4 years by choice, which tells you something about him, though I never figured out what. He taught me 2 things worth keeping. 1, a rifle doesn't lie to you. People lie to you about rifles. 2, when you don't know what something is, be quiet and watch it a while. I want you to hold on to that second one. She came in on the mail plane. Alaska Airlines ran a combi out of Anchorage twice a week, half passengers, half cargo, and if the weather turned, 0 of either. When it landed, you'd get half the island driving out to the strip just to see who got off. Not because we were friendly, because there was nothing else to do. That day the ceiling was maybe 400 feet, and the wind was doing that flat sideways thing where the rain never actually falls. It just travels. I was out there in the truck with Chief because we had a crate of optics coming in, and if it sat on the ramp for 2 hours it'd be full of salt. 6 people got off. 3 were contractors for the fuel farm. 1 was a fisheries guy with a laptop bag he was holding over his head like that would help. 1 was a guy from the tribal corporation who lived there. And 1 was her. She came down the airstairs slow. Not scared slow, careful slow, 1 hand on the rail, checking her footing on the wet metal like she'd fallen off something once and learned. Maybe 5'6". Dark hair cut short and practical, not stylish, the kind of cut you do yourself with clippers when you're tired of it. 35 maybe, 38. Hard to tell with the hood up. She had a rucksack that was too old to be new issue and too well kept to be junk. And she had a hard case, a long one, black, beat all to hell, with a stencil on the side that had been painted over so many times it was just a scar. Chief squinted at her through the windshield. "Who's that?" "Contract armorer," I said. "Came through on the manifest, Reyes." "They didn't tell me they were sending anybody." "They didn't tell you a lot of things, Chief." He gave me a look that would have peeled the paint off a howitzer, and got out of the truck. I watched her walk across that ramp in the crosswind. That's the part that stuck with me even before I knew anything. Everybody who comes off that plane the first time does the same thing. The wind hits them and they hunch, they turn sideways, they grab their hood. She didn't. She just leaned into it about 6 degrees and kept walking, straight line, like it was a hallway. Like she'd met it before. Her name was Alma Reyes. She had a Department of Defense contractor badge, a certification packet 3 inches thick, and a handshake that felt like shaking hands with a fence post. She was polite. She said sir to Chief and hey to me, and she didn't say much else that first day. I helped her carry her gear to the housing they'd stuck her in, one of the old Bayshore units, a townhouse with a kitchen from 1981, and a heater that clanked like something was trying to get out of it. "There's no cable," I told her. "There's a DVD shelf in the rec building. It's mostly Steven Seagal." "That's fine." "Wind gets loud at night. Sounds like somebody's on the roof. It's not." "That's fine." "Ma'am, there's also—" "Alma," she said, not sharp, just closing a door gently. "Not ma'am." I said okay. She set the long black case down on the kitchen table before she set down her rucksack, before she took off her coat, before anything. Later I'd think about that a lot, what a person puts down first. 4. Here's the situation we were in. We had 6 Barrett M107s in the armory, 50 caliber, semi-auto, 29-inch barrels, 30-odd pounds apiece with glass. They were old girls. They'd been through Iraq and Afghanistan and God knows where, come back through depot, gotten rebuilt and stripped and rebuilt again. And eventually the Navy sent them to the end of the world because the end of the world still needs something to shoot with. And 2 of them were wrong. Not broken I could fix, wrong. You'd have a shooter on the line, good shooter, and the first 2 rounds would go where he asked and the third would go somewhere else. Not a mile off. 6 inches. 8. Enough to lose you a plate at 1,000 yards and enough to make a man think he's flinching when he isn't. I'd torqued the rings. I'd swapped the glass. I'd checked the barrel key. I'd checked the buffer. I'd cleaned the chamber ring until it shone like a wedding band. Chief had done the same and then done it again while I watched, which is a special kind of humiliation. Nothing. So the detachment had put in a request for a specialist. That was 6 months before. You put in a request from a DAC, it goes into a building in Virginia, and it sits there and gets older. And then one day, a woman gets off the mail plane. I want to tell you about how she cleaned a rifle, because it's the whole story, really. Everything else is just the noise around it. Second morning, I came into the armory at 5:30 because I always did. Cold building. Concrete floor, the good kind of cold that wakes you up. I flipped the lights and she was already in there. She'd been in there a while. Coffee gone cold at her elbow, I noticed that, and I noticed it because I did the same thing. I always did the same thing, and Chief always gave me hell for it. She had M107 number 4 broken down on the bench. Now, when most guys clean a Barrett, it's a chore. You strip it, you slop CLP through the bore, you run a brush, you patch it, you slap it back together, you go get lunch. It's a big dumb rifle. It's forgiving. It doesn't ask much of you. She had it laid out like an autopsy. Every part in a line. Not roughly in a line evenly spaced in the order it came out. Bolt carrier, bolt, extractor, firing pin, springs, the buffer, the barrel key, all of it, on a green shop towel she'd folded twice. She had a set of dental picks that were clearly hers. Not ours, worn shiny at the grips. One of them with a piece of red heat shrink tubing on the handle, so she could find it by feel. She had a bore guide I'd never seen before, machined, not something you buy. And she was working the chamber with a pick and a Q-tip, and she was doing it slow, and her face was doing something I didn't have a word for at the time. I'd say now she was listening. I stood there like a jackass in the doorway with my coat still on. She didn't look up. Boon. "Ma'am, sorry, Alma. Hand me the brake off number 2. The muzzle brake. Please." I got it. She took it, didn't look at it, and did something I have honestly never seen another human being do in my life. She held it up by the edge, between 2 fingers, and she tapped it with the back of a screwdriver handle. Tink. Then she picked up the brake that had come off number 4, and she tapped that. Tunk. Different note. Barely. A quarter tone, maybe, the difference between a wine glass with water and one without. I only heard it because the building was dead silent and the wind hadn't gotten up yet. She set number 4's brake down on the bench, apart from everything else, like it was in trouble. "That one's cracked," she said. I looked at it. It was clean. It was straight. It had no crack. "There's no crack. It's on the inside of the second baffle. Hairline. It doesn't open up until it's hot." She was already back in the chamber with her pick. "It's why your third rounds walk. Cold bore's fine, second's fine, third one the crack breathes and the gas comes off the brake uneven and she jumps left." I stood there. "Ma'am, I pulled that brake. I looked at it, Chief looked at it." "I know you can't see it." She finally looked up at me, and she had these calm brown eyes that made me feel like I was 11 years old. "You have to hear it." They shipped that brake to depot 4 weeks later. The report came back on a Thursday. I still have a photocopy in a shoebox at my mother's house. Circumferential fracture, second expansion chamber, 4.1 millimeters. Non-visible without magnification. 4.1 millimeters. She heard 4.1 millimeters with a screwdriver handle in a cold room. After that, I didn't talk to her like she was a contractor. I still didn't talk to her much. She wasn't a talker. But I started coming in at 500 instead of 530, and I started shutting my mouth and watching, which was maybe the only smart thing I did that whole winter. Little things. She cleaned the barrel from the chamber end, always, no exceptions, even when it meant taking extra apart. Everybody knows you're supposed to. Almost nobody does it every single time. She did. She never let a patch touch the crown. She'd have died first, I think. She kept a torque wrench in a wooden box that she'd made, you could tell. The joints weren't pretty, and she checked her own torque values twice, and then a third time on the ring caps, and she wrote them down in a little green notebook. She had a scar on the web of her right hand between thumb and forefinger that was the exact shape of a Barrett's bolt handle. I don't know how you get that scar. I've thought about it. There aren't a lot of ways. She was missing about a half-inch off the top of her left ear. A clean nick, healed old, mostly hidden by her hair unless the wind was up. And she never, ever put a rifle down where somebody could walk past it and knock it. Not once. If she had to leave the bench, she'd move it, and she'd move it the way you move something asleep. One time, this is stupid, but it's true, I watched her take a rifle apart, and when she went to lay the bolt carrier on the towel, she stopped. She turned it over. There was a burr on the underside, a nothing burr, wouldn't affect a thing. She got a stone out. She spent 9 minutes on it. 9 minutes. I timed it because I count things when I'm nervous, and I'd been nervous around her since the mail plane. 9 minutes on a burr that didn't matter. Then she blew the dust off it and set it down, and she said to nobody quietly, the way you talk to a horse. There, that's better. Chief was standing in the door of his office. I looked over and he was watching her too, and his mug had stopped halfway to his mouth. He caught me looking. He put the mug down. Boone, he said, get the log. Chief, get the log. There's a page in every armory logbook where you write down who touched what. Chief made me pull all 6 M107 files. Serial numbers, service history, transfer records, the whole paper trail from the day they came out of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. We sat in his office with the door shut and went through them for 2 hours while the wind climbed, and the windows started to sound like somebody throwing gravel. 5 of those rifles had normal histories, boring, depot, unit. Number 4 had a gap. 2 years, no entries. Then a re-entry with a different property book, a different command code, and a stamp I didn't recognize. And then, 6 months after that, a line I've never seen on any weapon card before or since. RETAINED, non-standard custody, do not survey. Chief read it about 4 times. What's that mean, Chief? It means, he said slowly, that somebody who outranks everybody I've ever met told the Navy not to throw this rifle away. He closed the folder. Don't ask her about it. I wasn't gonna. Boone, he looked at me and there was something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not fear, something in the family of fear. I've been doing this a long time. Some people you get to ask questions. Some people you get to be quiet and be useful. He tapped the folder. Be useful. The seals came in the 2nd week of February. 14 of them, off a C-130 that came in through a hole in the weather and left in a hurry. A troop from a team I'm not going to name, out for a 2-week cold weather sniper package, long-range work in maritime wind, hide construction in Muskeg, the whole miserable curriculum. I remember standing on the ramp watching them come off, and the thing that struck me was how quiet they were. Movies get that wrong. There was no shouting. 14 men and their gear off an aircraft in 40-knot wind, and the loudest thing was the aircraft. Their commander was named Vaught. Commander Ezra Vaught. 6'1" maybe. Late 40s, which is old for that world. Gray coming in at the temples. He had a face like the north side of a barn. You couldn't read a thing on it, and he carried his own gear, which I noticed, and he was the last man off the aircraft, which I noticed more. He shook Chief's hand. He shook mine. Petty Officer Boone, he said, reading my name tape and then looking at my face and not at the tape again. You the armorer? Yes, sir. You any good? I thought about the 4.1 millimeters. I'm learning, sir. Something almost happened at the corner of his mouth. Good answer. And then he went inside and I didn't see him again for 4 days. Because Commander Vaught was the kind of officer who spent his time where the work was and not where the coffee was. The rest of them, though. The rest of them I saw plenty. You put 14 operators in a building on a rock in the Bering Sea for 2 weeks and there's going to be friction. That's not a knock on them. That's physics. Most of them were fine. Better than fine. There was a senior chief named Ives who was the calmest human being I've ever been in a room with, and a corpsman everybody called Doc Pisani who fixed my back with about 90 seconds of work and refused a beer for it. There was a kid named Ostrowski who was maybe 2 years older than me and who came in the armory on his own time and asked good questions and listened to the answers. And there was Cobb. Petty Officer First Class Deke Cobb. And I want to be careful here because of how this ends and because Cobb was not a bad man. I want that on the record. He was not a bad man. He was a very good shooter who had never in his life met somebody better, and he'd built his whole self out of that, and he was about to have it taken apart on a workbench. He came in the armory on day 2. Big guy, forearms like bridge cable, a beard he'd earned somewhere. He wanted his rifle back, number 3. He'd been assigned it, and he wanted it now, and Alma was working on it. She had the optic off. She was checking the base screws. "That's mine," Cobb said. "It'll be 40 minutes. It's 0, don't touch the glass." "It's 0 to a base that's backing out," Alma said, without looking up. "The rear screws got maybe 2 threads of bite left. You'd have lost it at round 30 and you'd have blamed the wind." Cobb looked at me. "I'd like to tell you I said something." He looked back at her. He took in the coverall with no name on it and the badge on the lanyard, and he did the math that a lot of men do very fast and very wrong. "You a machinist?" "No." "What are you?" "I'm the person fixing your rifle," Alma said. She still hadn't looked up. She said it without heat. That was the thing, I've replayed it 100 times, there was no heat in it. She wasn't scoring a point. She was just telling him a true thing while she worked. Cobb stood there for about 4 seconds. Then he laughed, one syllable of it, and said, "Sure," and walked out. And the door didn't slam, but it wanted to. Alma set the screwdriver down. She sat back. She rolled her shoulder, I noticed that too. She did that a lot, right shoulder, small circle, like something in there had been rebuilt by somebody in a hurry. "He's not wrong to be angry," she said. "Ma'am, he was. He's got a rifle he trusts and a stranger's hands on it." She picked the screwdriver back up. "That's the correct emotion. He's just aiming it badly. Here's what happened over the next 4 days, and I'm going to lay it out plain, because when I tell it fast it sounds made up. Day 3, she pulled the brake off number 4 and heard the crack. I already told you that. Day 4, Ostrowski, the kid, put a round through number 6 and the group opened up. He came in shaking his head, talking about his position, his breathing, his cheek welled. Alma took the rifle, put it in the vise, and ran a pencil down the barrel, actually ran a pencil, eraser first, listening to the sound as it dropped. Then she took it out and held the muzzle to the light and turned it slowly, and she said, "Somebody cleaned this from the muzzle with a steel rod. There's a wear ring 3 inches back. Not your fault, sailor. I had cleaned that rifle 6 months before, once, in a hurry before an inspection with a rod I shouldn't have used. I said so, out loud, in front of the seal." Alma nodded like I'd told her the weather. "Now you'll never do it again. That's what it cost. It's not a bad price." Ostrowski looked at me and looked at her and left. I sat down on a crate and put my head in my hands, and Alma let me do it for about a minute, and then she said, "Boone." "Yeah. Get the lapping compound." That's how she said forgiven. Day 5 is when it got strange. Day 5, Cobb came back. Not for a rifle. He stood in the doorway with 3 other guys behind him, and he had that expression men get when they've been talking about you in a room you weren't in. "Range 2's open," he said. 2,000 yards on the plate, winds about 30 quartering. Alma was cleaning number 4. She had it half apart and she'd been at it a long time. She was going through the trigger group, which nobody does, which nobody has any reason to do. "Okay," she said. "You seem to have a lot of opinions about our rifles." "They're not opinions. So come shoot one." There it is. I remember my stomach dropping, because I knew, the way you know when 2 cars are going to hit, that this was the moment the whole 2 weeks had been building toward, and there was no version of it that ended well. Alma stopped what she was doing. She laid the trigger housing down on the towel, square, parallel to everything else. She looked at the doorway. And she said something I have thought about every year since. She said, "No, thank you." Cobb blinked. "What?" "No, thank you. You won't shoot." "I'm not here to shoot," Alma said. "I'm here to make sure that when you do, it goes where you sent it." And she picked the trigger housing back up. Cobb stood there. His guys were behind him. This was worse for him than if she'd taken the bet and missed, and everybody in that room knew it, including her, and she hadn't done it on purpose, which somehow made it worse still. "Right," he said. He went out. Ostrowski stayed a second longer. He looked at the bench, at all those parts in their perfect rows, and I watched his eyes go over them the way a man reads a page. Then he left too. That night I couldn't sleep. Wind was up over 60. A DAC in a real blow doesn't howl, it thumps. You feel it in the floor. I lay in my rack and listened to the building take it, and I thought about a woman who could hear a crack in steel and wouldn't pick up a rifle. Around 200 I gave up. Put on my boots, walked over to the armory, because that's where I went when I couldn't sleep and Chief had given me a key and never asked why. Light was on. I stopped outside the door. Through the window in the door I could see her, sitting on a stool, and she had number 4 back together complete on the bench in front of her. Not being worked on, just there. And she had her hands on it. Both hands flat, one on the receiver and one out near the front, resting on it. Her head was down. She wasn't cleaning. She wasn't inspecting. She was just sitting with it. I stood outside in the wind for a good 90 seconds like an idiot, and I couldn't make myself open the door, and I couldn't make myself leave. Then she lifted her head and reached over and picked up her coffee, and I saw her face for about a second and a half before she turned. I've seen men cry. My father once at a funeral. Guys in boot, it's not that. She wasn't crying. Her face was completely dry and completely still. It was the face of somebody visiting a grave. I walked back to my rack. I didn't tell anybody. Now here's the part where the commander comes in. It was a Wednesday. Weather had shut the range down, visibility about 80 feet, the whole world the color of a nickel. 14 operators stuck indoors, cleaning gear, doing PT in a hangar, going quietly insane. I was in the armory at the far bench doing the world's most boring inventory. Alma was at her bench with number 4. She'd had it apart again, and now she was putting it together. She was seated. She had the receiver across her knees and she was working the bolt carrier back in, and she did the thing she always did. She ran it in, pulled it out, ran it in again, listening. Then she reached up and wiped the inside of the cheek rest with a rag, and I saw her thumb stop on something. She held it there. The door opened. Commander Vaught came in out of the fog with his collar up and about a pound of water on him, and he was 2 steps in before he saw her, and I saw him register it, the contractor, the armorer, fine, and start to turn toward Chief's office. He got about halfway through the turn. Then he stopped. I need you to understand what he was looking at. He wasn't looking at Alma. He couldn't see her face. She was bent over the rifle, hair down, hood of her coverall up. He was looking at her hands. At what her hands were doing. She was seating that bolt carrier. And then she rolled the rifle a quarter turn to the left and caught the charging handle with the outside edge of her right hand instead of gripping it, and eased it forward with 2 fingers on the receiver like she was closing a door on a sleeping baby. It's not a technique. Nobody teaches that. It's a thing exactly one person in the world does, because exactly one person's hand got opened up by that bolt handle at some point in her life, and she never once did it the normal way again. Commander Vaught went absolutely still. Not surprised still. I've seen surprised. This was the other thing. This was a man who has walked into a room and found something that is not supposed to be in that room. His hand came up about 6 inches from his side and stopped there. He said, "Where did you get that rifle?" Alma didn't look up. She said, "Depot, Bravo lot out of Crane." "Look at me. And I want to tell you something. I'd been on that island 7 months. I'd heard men give orders in every register there is. I had never heard a voice do what his voice did on those 3 words. There was nothing in it, not anger, not command. It was the sound of a man asking for something, in the only voice he had left to ask with. Alma Reyes set the rifle down on the bench, square, parallel to the edge, the way she always did. She reached up and pushed her hood back. And she turned around. I was standing 11 feet away with a boar brush in my hand, and cold coffee on the bench, and I watched the commander of a SEAL troop look at that woman's face. He didn't move for 4 seconds. I counted. I count when I'm nervous. The color went out of him, straight out, like somebody had pulled a plug at his ankles. He put a hand on the doorframe. He didn't lean on it. He just put it there, the way you do when the floor has started to feel like a suggestion. And in the whole building, the only sound was that wind, thumping, and the fluorescent light over bench 2 that had a bad ballast and always would. Alma looked back at him. Her face didn't change at all. She said very quietly, "Hello, sir." And Commander Ezra Vaught said, "And this is the last thing I'm going to tell you today, and I'm telling it exactly the way it came out of him, because I have never forgotten one syllable of it." He said, "They told me you were dead. Nobody moved. I've thought about that a lot, how long nobody moved. It couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 seconds, but it had weight to it, like time had gotten thick." Commander Vaught with his hand on the doorframe, fog coming in around his legs because he hadn't shut the door. Alma sitting on that stool with the rifle laid square on the bench behind her and her hands loose in her lap. And me, 11 feet away, holding a boar brush like it was going to save me. The wind thumped the wall. Alma said, "I know what they told you." That was all, 6 words. And Vaught's jaw did something, a small thing, muscle jumping under the skin at the hinge, and he shut his eyes for maybe a second and a half. I want to be honest here. My first thought was not what is happening. My first thought was I am not supposed to be in this room. Chief Prout must have felt it come through the wall. His office door opened and he came out with his mug and he took one look, and he set the mug down on the counter without looking where he was putting it, and it went down crooked and slopped, and Chief Prout was a man who would notice a spilled coffee at 100 yards, and he did not notice this one. He said, "Boone, outside." "Chief." "Now, son." I put the brush down. My hands weren't right. I walked past Commander Vaught close enough that I could smell the rain on him, and he didn't see me. He was not seeing anything in that building except her. Chief followed me out and pulled the door shut, and then, God help me, he locked it from the outside, turned the key and pocketed it. Then he stood there with his back to the door in a 60-knot wind with no coat on. I said, "Chief, what?" "Go to the shop." "Chief." Elias. He almost never used my first name, maybe 3 times in 7 months. "Go to the shop, make some coffee, don't make it good, take your time." I stood there. He looked out at the fog, where Mount Moffett was supposed to be and wasn't. "There's things a man gets to know," he said, "and there's things a man gets to be near. Today you're near. That's a privilege and it costs you nothing. Don't turn it into the other one." He looked at me. "Go make bad coffee, Boone." So I did. 40 minutes. That's how long the door stayed locked. I know because I sat in the shop with the world's worst pot of coffee, and I watched the clock on the wall, the industrial kind with the second hand that ticks, and I listened to it tick 2,400 times. I didn't hear voices. The armory walls are 8 inches of concrete, because that's what you build them out of when there's a lot of ammunition inside. At the 38-minute mark the door opened. Commander Vaught came out. He had his collar down. He'd taken his cap off at some point and he was holding it in his left hand. His right hand was shaking. Not a lot. It's the kind of thing you'd never see across a room. But he came across the yard and up the shop steps and stood in the doorway, and I was 5 feet from him, and his right hand had a fine tremor in it, and he saw me see it, and he put it in his coat pocket. He didn't say anything for a while. "Then you're the armorer?" "Yes, sir." "How long has she been here?" 11 days, sir." He nodded slowly, like that number was significant, like he was doing arithmetic with it. 11 days. He looked at the coffee pot and then at me, and I swear something almost human went across his face. "Is that coffee?" It's not good, sir," Chief said. "Pour it." So I poured a cup of deliberately bad coffee for a SEAL commander, and he drank about half of it standing up, and he grimaced, and he said, "You take orders well." "I try, sir." "Don't get proud of it." He set the cup down. "Petty Officer Boone, I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to think before you answer. What have you seen her do?" I thought about it, I really did. "She heard a crack in a muzzle brake, sir, with a screwdriver, 4 millimeters on the inside. Depot confirmed it a month later." He didn't react. He'd expected worse or better, I couldn't tell which. "What else?" "She won't shoot." His head came up. "Say that again." Cobb, Petty Officer Cobb, challenged her out to range 2,000 on the plate, and she said no. I heard my own voice going quiet. She said she wasn't here to shoot. She said she was here to make sure that when we shoot, it goes where we sent it. Commander Vaught stood in that shop doorway with the fog behind him, and he looked, for a second, about 90 years old. "Yeah," he said, almost to himself. "Yeah, she would." He picked up his cap. "Sir?" "No. I didn't ask anything yet, sir." "You were going to." He put the cap on and squared it. "Boone, there's about 400 people alive who know what I know. I can't add to that list. That's not me being an officer at you. That's a legal fact, and I'd be breaking it if I so much as told you the name of a place." He stopped in the doorway, looked out at the yard, at the whipping fog, at the drowned old town beyond it. And he said, very quietly, and I don't think he meant to say it out loud, "Coal fire." I said, "Sir." He blinked, came back from wherever he'd been. "Nothing," he said, "nothing, it's a word." And he walked out into the weather. I looked it up later. Years later, when I had internet and time and a bad habit of picking at scars. You won't find it. I've tried every way there is to try. It's not a place. It's not an operation with a Wikipedia page and a Netflix documentary. It's the kind of word that got assigned to 7 or 9 or 11 men one afternoon in an operations tent by a lieutenant who was thinking about something else, and then it got carried into a valley, and then most of it didn't come back. Chief told me once, much later, when he was retired, and I was buying him a beer in Bremerton, Chief told me, "Those words don't mean anything until somebody dies under them. Then they mean everything, and only to about a dozen people, and none of them will ever say it out loud on purpose." Alma came out of the armory an hour after Vaught did. She walked past the shop. She didn't come in. I watched her go up the road toward Bayshore with her hands in her pockets and the wind hitting her from the side, and she leaned into it 6 degrees like always, and she went into her townhouse and the light didn't come on. Chief came in and poured himself the bad coffee and drank it without comment, which frightened me more than anything else that day. I said, "Is she in trouble?" He looked into the mug. "No," he said. "I think she's the opposite of trouble. I think she's what's left of something." Next morning she was at the bench at 500, and it was like nothing had happened at all. That's the part that got me. She said, "Morning, Boone." She asked me to hand her the small pin punch. She told me the recoil buffer on number 2 was tired and we should log it. She drank cold coffee. And around 700, the commander came in. He knocked first. On the door of his own detachment's armory, he knocked, and I looked up and saw Chief Prout clock that, and Chief's eyebrows went up about a millimeter and came back down. Vaught said, "Ms. Reyes." "Commander." "My troop shoots at 1400, range 3. Weather's supposed to lift by 11. That's what they tell me." He stood there another second. "The rifles are good." Alma set down her pick. "Number 3's good now. Number 1 has maybe 800 rounds left in the barrel before the throat opens up, and I'd rather you knew that than found out. Number 5 is fine. Number 6 has a wear ring, but she'll hold for this package." She paused. "Number 4 is good." Something passed between them when she said number 4. Vaught nodded. Thank you, sir. He turned to go and then he didn't. He looked back. Reyes, sir, are you all right out here? I have never in my life heard an officer ask a question like that. Alma looked at the rifle in front of her. She turned the pick over in her fingers. It's quiet, she said. It's a good place to be quiet. Vaught took that, turned it over, accepted it. All right, he said and went out. That afternoon he gathered his troop in the hangar bay. All 14 of them, plus Doc Pisani, plus Senior Chief Ives standing at the back with his arms crossed the way he always did, like a man watching weather come in. I was up on the catwalk running a cable, and I had no business being there, and nobody told me to leave. Commander Vaught did not make a speech. He wasn't the type. He stood in front of them with his hands behind his back and he said, roughly this. The contract armorer's name is Reyes. She's working our weapons for the duration. Nobody will ask her a question that isn't about a rifle. Nobody will look at her paperwork. Nobody will discuss her. If any of you comes to understand why I'm saying this, you will not have understood it from me, and you will carry it the way you carry the rest of it. That's all. And that was all. He walked out. 14 men stood there. I was directly above Deke Cobb. I could see the top of his head, the way his shoulders sat. He didn't move for a long moment. Then Ostrowski, the kid, said something to him low and Cobb said, yeah, and they broke up and went to work. But I saw it happen. In that little space of quiet, I watched a thing get planted in a man. Because Commander Vaught had just told 14 professionals that there was a door in the building, and they were not to open it. And Cobb was a good man, like I said, but he was a good man who had spent his whole adult life being the one who opens the door. The weather broke on Friday. Blue sky of all things. First blue sky in 19 days. The whole island turned into a different planet. You could see all the way out to Kagalaska, and the bay went from gunmetal to this hard, bright green, and somebody found a football. They shot for 2 days. Long stuff, out past a mile with the wind coming off the water in slabs. I ran the ammo truck and the spotting scope, and I fetched more coffee than any human being should carry. They shot well. They were extraordinary, honestly. There's a difference between a good shooter and one of those men, and the difference is that a good shooter makes a hard shot and looks around to see if you saw it. Cobb was the best of them, that's not opinion. His book was cleaner than anybody's. He read that wind like it was written down for him. On the second afternoon he hit a plate at 1900 yards, cold bore first round, with a crosswind that was doing about 4 different things between him and the target, and the only thing he said afterward was, "Send it again," because he wanted to know if it was luck. It wasn't luck. Sunday night at the galley, that's when it happened. We ate in the same room, all of us, because there was only one room. Cobb was 2 tables over with Ostrowski and a couple of others. Alma was by the window eating soup and reading a paperback with the cover gone. And Cobb said, not loud, but in the voice of a man who wants a thing to be heard at a certain distance. All I'm saying is anybody can pick a rifle apart. Doesn't mean they can send a round. Ostrowski said something to him. No, I'm not being an ass. I'm saying there's 2 kinds of people at a range. There's people who do it, and there's people who talk about the doing. Alma turned a page. And Senior Chief Ives, who had not said a word all evening, who was sitting alone by the coffee urn eating a piece of pie. Ives said, Deke. That's it, just the name, not even loudly. Cobb stopped. Eat your dinner, Ives said, and went back to his pie. Cobb ate his dinner. But he sat there afterward for a long time with his hands flat on the table, and he looked over at that woman by the window with her soup and her ruined paperback, and I could see the door in his head, and I could see him standing at it. Monday, the range was cold, and the troop was doing hide sights out in the muskeg. which meant 12 hours of lying in freezing mud for the privilege of being critiqued about it. Cobb had a torn hamstring from the second day and Doc Pisani had grounded him, which for a man like that is worse than the injury. So he was on light duty, which meant he was around. I was in the armory alone. Chief was at the strip. Alma was over at the shop chasing a lathe part. Cobb came in and signed out rifle number 4. And I let him. I want to say that plainly because it's mine to carry. He had a valid range card. He said he was going to run function checks on the 200 bay. He was a first-class petty officer, and I was a third-class kid from Poplar Bluff, and he asked for a rifle, and I got the rifle. The weapon card said RETAINED, non-standard custody. Do not survey. It did not say do not issue. I told myself that about 40 times over the next 2 hours. He came back at 1600 with the rifle over his shoulder and a look on his face I hadn't seen before. He set it on the bench. He'd cleaned it, I could see, though not the way she cleaned it, obviously. Nobody cleans anything the way she cleaned things. He said, "Boone, petty officer, how many rounds you think are through this rifle?" I couldn't tell you. It's been through depot twice that I know of. Barrel's got maybe. That's not what I asked. He was standing over it with his hands on the bench and his head down. It's a strange thing to see a big man look small. I shot 4 inches better with that rifle than I've shot in my life, he said. Sir, it's the same as. It's not, he said it fast. Then he made himself slow down. It's not the same. I don't know how to explain it to you. Everything's right in it. The trigger breaks like glass and there's nothing loose anywhere, and I put 9 rounds through a plate at a mile and they went in a hole. He looked up at me. Somebody built that rifle. Somebody sat with it. I didn't say anything. He turned it over on the bench slowly. He'd taken the cheek rest off to clean the carrier, which you have to. He hadn't put it back on. Boone, he said, what's this? I came around the bench. Under the cheek rest, on the flat of the receiver where nobody's eye ever goes, somebody had scratched into the metal with a pick or a nail or the point of a knife. The letters were crooked, deep, done with pressure, not patience, the kind of thing a man does when his hands are cold or shaking or both. It said, HOLLIS, and beneath it, smaller in different strokes, thinner, more careful, a steadier hand and a smaller tool. It's okay, ALMA. The fluorescent over bench 2 buzzed. I stood there with Deke Cobb, and neither of us moved, and we both, at the same moment, understood that we were looking at something that was not ours. Cobb's face went through about 4 things in 3 seconds. He put his hand out toward it and stopped, an inch above the metal, and pulled it back. Boone, he said, and his voice had changed. Who is Hollies? And that's when the door opened. Alma came in with a lathe part in her hand, wrapped in a rag. She saw the rifle on the bench. She saw the cheek rest lying beside it. She saw us standing over it. She stopped in the doorway, and the wind came in around her, and the rag with the lathe part in it slipped a little in her fingers, and she caught it without looking. Nobody said anything for what felt like a year. Cobb straightened up, and whatever else you want to say about Deke Cobb, and I've said some of it, I'll say this too. He didn't lie, he didn't cover, he didn't make a joke. He said, "Ma'am, I took this rifle out. I didn't have permission from you, and I should have asked. I cleaned it and I found this and I looked at it and I shouldn't have." Alma set the lathe part down on the counter. She came over. She didn't look at Cobb, she looked at the letters. And she reached out and put 2 fingers on them, light, the way she touched everything, and she ran them over HOLLIS, and then over the smaller words, and her fingers stopped there. "You shot it," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "How was the trigger?" Cobb's throat moved. It was the best trigger I ever felt in my life. Alma nodded. "Good," she said. "He always could do a trigger." She picked up the cheek rest. She looked at the screws and one of them wasn't seated right. Cobb had cross-started it half a thread, the way anybody would, and she got a driver and backed it out and started it again clean, and she torqued it, and she checked the torque, and she checked it again. Cobb stood there the whole time. He didn't move an inch, neither did I. And then, when it was done and the rifle was whole again, she stood with both hands on the bench and she looked at the wall, and she said, in a voice with absolutely nothing dramatic in it at all. His name was Renner Hollies. He was a gunner's mate. He was 31. She paused. He was the best hand with a rifle I ever met, and I include everybody I've met since, and I've met a lot of people since. Cobb said, "Ma'am, You want to ask me who scratched the second part?" Cobb didn't answer. "He did," Alma said. "Both parts. He scratched his own name because he thought if we lost the rifle somebody would know whose it was, and then he scratched the other thing because he knew I'd find it." She turned the rifle a little on the bench, square to the edge. "He wrote it upside down and backwards from where he was lying," she said, "so it'd read right when I picked it up." The wind hit the building. I was 22 years old, and I had never in my life wanted so badly to not be standing where I was standing. Cobb, Big Deke Cobb, who read wind like scripture, who'd put 9 rounds in one hole at a mile, Deke Cobb said, "Ma'am, why don't you shoot?" And I thought, don't. And Alma Reyes looked up from the rifle and looked at him, right at him straight, and she wasn't angry and she wasn't hurt. And there wasn't one drop of drama anywhere on her. And she said, "Because the last time I did, I was good at it. I didn't learn the rest of it for 9 years. That's important. I want you to understand that I stood in that armory at 22 years old and heard a woman say because the last time I did, I was good at it, and then I went and ate dinner, and then I went to bed, and then I got up the next day and did an inventory. Because that's what you do. Life doesn't hand you the second half of a thing just because you're ready for it. I got the second half in 2013, in a parking lot in Coronado, California, standing next to a rental car with the engine running. Chief Prout died in March of that year. Pancreas. It took him in about 11 weeks, which he considered efficient, and he said so in a text message, 3 days before he stopped answering them. The funeral was small. He'd never married. He had a sister in Yakima and about 60 men who'd worked for him, and every one of us was a wreck. I was standing at the back of the reception with a paper plate I hadn't touched when a man came up beside me and looked at the room and said, "He made me clean a rifle twice." I turned. Commander Vaught was a captain now. He was in civilian clothes and the gray had won everywhere, and he'd gotten thinner in a way I didn't like. "Sir." "Boone," he shook my hand. He remembered me. It had been 9 years and he remembered me and he remembered my name. "You still in?" "Chief Warrant too, sir. Bangor." "Good," he said. "That's good." He looked at the flowers, the photograph, Chief's stupid mug that somebody had brought and set on the table. "Twice," he said again. "I was a lieutenant, 1999. I told him I'd cleaned it and he took it back apart in front of me without a word and there was carbon on the bolt face. He never said anything about it. He just handed it back and went in his office. He put his hands in his pockets. I hated him for about a year," he said. "I've been trying to be him since." We ended up outside. It's how those things go. You come out for air and then you can't make yourself go back in. He walked me to my car and I unlocked it and put the engine on for the heat, and neither of us got in, and we stood there in the dark with the door open and that little chime going. And Vaught said, "She's dead, you know." I didn't say anything, because there was only one she and there had only ever been one, in a room in a building on a rock in the Bering Sea, and I had never spoken her name to another human being in 9 years. 2 years ago, he said, her heart, she was 51. He was looking at something across the parking lot that wasn't there. She'd been living in Boise, working at a gun shop, fixing things. "Sir." They told me she was dead once before, he said. So I checked this time. I got on a plane. He laughed, and there was nothing in it. That's the kind of man I've become. I don't believe anybody about anything anymore. He looked at me. You were in the room, he said. You've been carrying half a thing for 9 years. Yes, sir. Because Wade Prout locked you out of it and told you to go make bad coffee. Yes, sir. Captain Ezra Vaught nodded slowly, and he looked back at the building where an old man's photograph was propped up on a table between two poinsettias, and he said, "Well, he's not here to stop me now." 24. This is what he told me. Some of it I've smoothed out because he told it badly. He told it out of order in pieces, doubling back. That's how men tell the true ones. But I haven't added anything. I want that clear. Everything in here is his or hers or Renner Hollies's. Cunard Province, Spring 2004. Vaught was a lieutenant then, 29 years old, running a small element out of a fire base that sat in the bottom of a valley with mountains on 3 sides like a hand closing. The place had a name. He wouldn't tell me the name. He said, "It doesn't matter, and it's still there, and there's men in it tonight." He said the thing about that valley was the sound. Sound went strange in there. A rifle a mile away could sound like it was next to your ear, and a rifle across the wire could sound like it was in another country. You couldn't trust your ears at all, which is a hard way to live. They had 11 men and a 50. Not a Barrett, not then. They had an old M2, the big tripod gun, and it had been up on that hill so long that the parts had welded themselves together with dust and grease. And in April it started doubling, firing 2 rounds on 1 trigger pull, which is a thing that will get somebody killed eventually, and everybody knew it, and everybody kept using it because it was the gun they had. So a request went in. And what came back, on a Chinook, in a windstorm on a Tuesday, was a gunner's mate 2nd class named Alma Reyes with a toolbox and a set of dental picks, and no business being anywhere near that valley. "I want to be honest about the first thing I thought," Vaught said. He was leaning against my rental car by then. "I thought they sent me the wrong person. That's what I thought. I'd asked for a weapons repair tech, and they sent me a woman about 5'6" who looked like she'd been on the aircraft for a week." He shook his head. "I was 29, and I thought I knew what a repair tech looked like." "What'd she do, sir?" "She fixed the gun in an hour and 10 minutes. He held up a finger. "But that's not it. Anybody could have fixed it given the parts. What she did was she fixed it, and then she came and found me in the operations tent, and she said, 'Sir, the gun's fine, but your barrels are the problem. You've got 3 barrels for that gun, and 2 of them have got the same serial prefix, and they came off the same bad lot.' And she'd looked it up. She'd looked up the lot number in a book she'd brought, on her own time, in Afghanistan. And I said, 'How'd you know to look?' And she said," and here Vaught's voice did something, and he had to start over. "She said, because the gun sounded tired in a way that wasn't its fault." Renner Hollies was a gunner's mate 1st class, and he had been in that valley for 5 months. Vaught described him like this: 6'4", about 170 pounds, looked like a coat hanger with a beard, talked constantly and never said anything you didn't want to hear. Hollies was not a SEAL. He was a fleet sailor, an armorer who'd been attached to that outpost through some paperwork nobody could explain, and had made himself so completely necessary that when his rotation came up, Vaught personally called a man he did not like and asked for a favor he did not want to owe. Hollies could fix anything. Vaught said he once fixed a generator with a piece of a folding chair. And Hollies could shoot. Not in the way the operators shot. He was too tall, too loose. He had a terrible position, and he knew it, and he didn't care. But there was a thing he could do that Vaught had never seen anybody do before or since. He could see wind. That's how Vaught put it. He said, "You'd give a man a mirage and a flag and a scope, and he'd give you a number. Hollies gave you the number before you asked. He'd look up the valley for 6 seconds and say, 4 left, going to 5 in a minute, and it would go to 5. Alma Reyes was supposed to be there for 9 days. She and Hollies rebuilt every weapon on that firebase in 5 of them. Vaught said he'd walk past the connects where they worked at 2 in the morning and hear them arguing about torque values. Just arguing. Just 2 armorers in a metal box in the mountains, going at it about barrel nut specs like it was a religious dispute. She laughed, Vaught said. I'd forgotten that. I hadn't thought about it in years, and I'm standing in a parking lot at Wade Pruitt's funeral, and I'm remembering that Alma Reyes had a laugh. He wiped his mouth with his hand. You never heard it, he said, did you? No, sir. No. On the 7th day, a resupply column got hit on the road below. Not a big thing. Not by that valley's standards. 2 vehicles, an IED, small arms from up on the eastern ridge, the same ridge they always came from because it was the good ridge, and everybody on both sides knew it was the good ridge, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. Vaught took 8 men down. He left 3 at the firebase. He left a cook, a young radio man, and Hollies, because Hollies had a torn calf and could not walk fast, and Hollies was furious about it. And Hollies said, Vaught remembered this exactly, sir, I'll crawl. And Vaught said no. And then he made the decision he has thought about every day since. He said, take Reyes and get up on the high point and glass the eastern ridge for me, and tell me what you see. Because it was safe, it was inside the wire, it was a job for 2 people who couldn't run. I gave them a rifle, Vaught said, because I wasn't going to send anybody anywhere without one, and the only long gun in the arms room that wasn't down the hill with my men was the Barrett. He looked at me in the dark. The one she was cleaning when I walked in, on your island, 9 years ago. Here's what happened, and I'll tell it the way Vaught told it, which was slow and out of order and with long stops. The column was a bait. Everybody's column is always a bait. That's the whole war, but this one was baited well. When Vaught's 8 men got down to the road, 60 or 70 fighters came off the western slope behind them and put them in a wadi. The firebase was suddenly a very important building. And on the eastern ridge, the good ridge, the one everybody knew about, a group came over the top with 2 machine guns and started setting them up to shoot down into that wadi, from a place where Vaught's men could not see them, could not reach them, and could not survive them. 1,100 meters. Nobody on the firebase but a cook, a radio man, an armorer with a torn calf, and a gunner's mate 2nd class named Alma Reyes. And a Barrett. Hollies got behind the rifle first. Of course he did. He was 6'4" with a scope eye and he could see wind. He got behind that rifle on the high point with the bipod on a sandbag and Alma spotting for him, and he started working, and Vaught, 1.5 miles away in a ditch with rounds going overhead, heard the 50 go off behind him and thought, thank God. Hollies put 3 rounds into that ridge and stopped the first gun before it was ever mounted. And then the men on the ridge did the obvious thing. They shot back at the high point. Alma told this part to Vaught years later in a room once. He said she told it like a maintenance report, flat, in order, nomming parts. She said the first burst went over. She said the second burst hit the sandbags. She said the third burst hit Renner Hollies in both hands. Think about what that means. He was behind a rifle, hands forward, one on the grip, one under the buttstock, cheek down on the rest. A round came in and went through the fore end of the rifle and through the outside of his left hand and took 2 fingers and a great deal else, and something, a fragment of the rifle, a piece of a round, nobody will ever know, went through the meat of his right. And another round in the same burst went in under his arm and through the top of his right lung. And Renner Hollies rolled off that rifle and sat up against the sandbags and looked at his hands and said, well, that's a problem. Vaught stopped talking for a while there. Somewhere in the building behind us people were laughing, because that's what happens at funerals eventually, and the sound came out across the parking lot thin and strange. "She got a tourniquet on the arm," he said finally, "and she packed the chest. She'd been to the same class everybody goes to. She did it right. It took her about 90 seconds, and she said the whole time he was telling her she was doing it wrong. And then she picked up his rifle. And he said, 'Don't.' I asked, I couldn't help it. 9 years of not asking, and I asked." "Why did he say don't, sir?" Vaught looked at his shoes. "Because he knew her," he said. "Because he'd been in a connex with her for 5 days arguing about torque values. And he knew what kind of person she was all the way down. And he knew what it does to that kind of person." He looked up. He wasn't protecting the mission, Boone. He wasn't protecting himself. He was 5 minutes from bleeding out, and he was trying to protect her from a thing that hadn't happened yet. She got behind the rifle anyway. She'd never shot one past 400 yards. She'd built dozens. She'd zeroed them, function-checked them, rebarreled them, and put them in the hands of better people. She knew everything about that weapon except the one thing. She could not see the ridge. That's the part nobody understands. The optic on that rifle had been struck. The glass was crazed and the whole picture was smeared gray. She could see shapes. She said it was like looking through a bathroom window. Hollies could see the ridge. He was lying 8 feet away with his lung filling up, and he'd lost his glasses, and one eye wasn't working right, but he could see the wind, and he could see the ridge, and he could still talk. So they did the only thing there was. He talked her onto it. Vaught heard it. That's how he knows. That's the only reason anybody knows, and it is the fact that has organized the rest of that man's life. Because the high point had a radio, and the radio man was down at the wall by then, and Alma had a headset around her neck from spotting, and at some point in all of it, the transmit switch got pinned under a sandbag. So for 31 minutes, every man on that net, 8 men in a waddy, a cook, a radio man, a company 2 valleys over, and a lieutenant lying in a ditch with his face in the dirt, listened to an open channel. And what they heard was this. A man's voice, wet, getting slower. "Giving corrections. Up 2, your low left, up 2.5 left 1. And then a gunshot. That's a miss. That's a miss, don't look at it, don't look at it, come back to me. Winds 4, going 5, hold 5 and send." And then a gunshot. Okay, you got that one." Vaught said his radio man was crying and still passing traffic. Vaught said in the wadi, with rounds coming off the rocks, 8 of the hardest men he has ever known lay perfectly still and listened to a dying armorer teach a woman to shoot. She missed the first 2. Vaught said that was the worst of it, that it was on the net, that everyone heard her miss, that everyone heard Holly say, "Come back to me," like a man talking a horse out of a burning barn. Then she stopped missing. Vaught said, "I want you to understand what happened up there. She had no glass. She was shooting a rifle she'd never fired, at a ridge she could not see, off a bipod on a bag that had been shot through with a man's voice in her ear. And she was good at it. That's the thing. That's what none of them ever got past. There's men who trained for 11 years to do what she did in the last 20 minutes of that gunfight, and she did it while she was holding pressure on a chest wound between shots, because she did. She was going back and forth. She'd send a round and crawl over and put her hand back on him." I said, "Sir." 7, he said. 7 men on that ridge. And the guns never got mounted, and my 8 got out of that wadi, and every single one of them came home and had children. He said it like a confession. The last correction came at about the 28-minute mark. Holly said, and this is on a recording somewhere, in a building, in a vault, and Vaught has heard it exactly once, and he told me he will never listen to it again as long as he lives. Holly said, "He's moving right to left, he's at the notch. Winds dropped, hold 4, send when you're ready, Alma." And then nothing. She said his name twice. Then the rifle went off. The bird came at 40 minutes. They flew Renner Hollies to a bigger place and then to Bagram, and his heart stopped twice on the way and they started it twice, and he lived 31 hours. Vaught didn't see him. He was still down in the valley. Alma sat with him the whole time. Here is the part that I did not want to be true, and that I have never been able to make untrue. At some point in those 31 hours, in a canvas hospital with the generators going and a man dying in front of her, Alma Reyes was still holding that rifle. She'd carried it onto the helicopter. She would not put it down. 2 men tried to take it and stopped trying. And Renner Hollies, with both hands wrapped into white clubs, with a tube in his chest and 4 hours of speech left in him, asked a nurse for the multi-tool out of his cargo pocket. He could not hold it. Vaught said the nurse held it for him. He said Hollies put the point of it against the flat of that receiver, up under the cheek rest where nobody's eye ever goes, and he pushed with the heel of a hand that had no fingers on it, and he dragged 5 letters into the steel and rested, and then dragged 11 more. Upside down, backwards, so that when she finally said it on a bench somewhere someday, 1,000 miles from that valley, and stripped it the way she stripped everything, it would read right way up. It's okay, Alma. I stood in that parking lot, and I put my hand over my mouth like an old woman. Vaught didn't look at me. He gave me that. He looked at the sky and let me have it. Sir, I said eventually, you said they told you she was dead. He came back from a long way off. Yes. Who told you? And Captain Vaught smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I've ever seen on a human face. A staff officer, he said, in a building 9 weeks later. Because you see, Boone, there was a problem. There was a very serious problem. Because a gunner's mate 2nd class, a repair technician, not a designated marksman, not authorized, not trained, not anything, had engaged and killed 7 combatants in 31 minutes on an open radio net that about 40 people heard. And the after-action had to say something. So they wrote it that Hollies did it. He let that sit. They wrote that GM1 Renner Hollies engaged the Eastern Ridge with an M107 and was mortally wounded in the exchange. Which is almost true. It's true the way a lie is true when a lawyer builds it. And they gave him a medal, posthumous, and his mother has it. And I stood in her kitchen in Ohio, and I let her show it to me, and I said nothing. And Reyes. They had no place to put her. Vaught's voice was completely level, which is how I knew. So they put her nowhere. She was medically retired at 28 with a shoulder that had been rebuilt twice and a hearing loss and a piece missing out of her ear, and the paperwork said it was a vehicle accident, and the file was closed, and the recording went in a box. And when I came back and asked where she was, a man behind a desk told me she had died of complications at Landstuhl. He said it to make me stop asking. Sir, that's... He was 34 years old, Vaught said, and he had a photograph of his kids on the desk, and I have thought about killing him. And I know exactly what that says about me, and I've made my peace with all of it except one thing. He turned and looked straight at me. I believed him, he said. That's the thing. For 13 years I lit a candle in my head for a dead woman who was in Boise fixing shotguns. He got in his own car, eventually. He sat with the door open and his feet on the asphalt. They never took the rifle from her, I said. The custody line, do not survey. No. Why? Because I wrote that line, Vaught said. In 2004. It was the last thing I had the authority to do about any of it. I couldn't fix the after-action, and I couldn't find her, and I couldn't tell his mother the truth. But I could keep them from cutting up that rifle. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. So I put a hold on it. And it went through depot, and it went to the fleet, and it got rebuilt and rebuilt, and it went out to the end of the world with a piece of a man's handwriting inside of it. And I never expected to see it again in my life. He started the engine. And then in February of 2004, no. He shut his eyes. 2005, February. I walked into an armory on an island in the Bering Sea to complain about the weather. And there was a woman sitting there with that rifle across her knees. And she closed the bolt with the side of her hand. He put the car in gear. "You want to know the worst thing?" he said. I didn't. It's not that they lied. It's not the metal. It's not even the boy behind the desk. He looked out the windshield at the funeral home. It's that when I said her name, she said, "Hello, sir." He pulled the door shut and rolled the window down. 9 years I'd been dead to her too, Boone, and she just said, "Hello, sir," like I'd been late to a meeting. He drove off and I stood there until the automatic lights went out, and I had to wave my arms to bring them back. And I want you to understand where we are now in this story. Because everything I've told you in this part, Cunnar, the ridge, the radio, the multi-tool, I did not know any of it on the day this happened. On that Monday afternoon in February on a DAC, standing in an armory with Deke Cobb and a woman who wouldn't shoot, I knew nothing. All I had was a scratched name in steel and a sentence. Because the last time I did, I was good at it. And 4 days later, the weather turned into something the old-timers on that island still won't talk about, and a plane went off the end of the runway into Kuluk Bay with 9 people on it. And somebody had to get out to Finger Bay in the dark with a rifle. 4 days. That's all there was between Deke Cobb reading a dead man's handwriting off the flat of a receiver and the night I'm about to tell you about. 4 days, and in those 4 days nothing happened. That's what I want to say first. Nothing happened at all. Alma cleaned rifles. Cobb rehabbed his hamstring in the hangar. Ostrowski came in and asked about headspace. Chief drank coffee out of a mug that said "World's OKAYEST Grandpa" and yelled at me about a logbook entry. And on Thursday the weather started to build. And by Friday morning, the National Weather Service out of Anchorage had put out a thing they don't put out often, and the old-timers on a DAC, the 11 or 12 people who actually lived there, who'd been there since the base closed and had no intention of leaving, those people went and got their trucks off the low ground. There's a phrase they used. I heard it from Harold Snigaroff at the fuel dock on Friday afternoon. He said, "She's gonna sit down on us." I didn't know what it meant. I found out. Harold was on the plane. I need to say that now, so it's not a trick later. Harold Snigaroff was 56 years old and he worked for the Tribal Corporation, and he had been off-island for 11 days seeing a doctor in Anchorage about his knee, and he was flying home on the Friday come by because he did not want to spend the weekend in a hotel. He was one of the 6 people who got off the mail plane the day Alma Reyes did. I told you about him in about 4 words. A guy from the Tribal Corporation who lived there. I'm sorry about that. I was 22 and I didn't look at people. He had a wife named Verna. He had grandkids in Sand Point. He'd been born on the island of Atka and taken to a DAC as a boy, and he used to walk out along Kuluk Bay in the evenings, and he knew where every one of the old bunkers was, and he'd tell you if you asked. He was on the plane. The Saab came in at 1840 in the dark, with the wind sitting at 52 knots and gusting into the 60s, 30 degrees off the runway heading. That's inside the limits barely if you're good. The captain was good. He'd been flying the Aleutian run for 11 years. He got it down. That's the part that has never left me. He landed it. He put that airplane on the numbers in a crosswind that would peel your face off, and he had it rolling out straight, and everything was fine, and everyone on that airplane, for about 4 seconds, was fine. And then a gust came off the shoulder of Mount Moffett, 68 knots. They figured later in a single blow, the kind of thing that valley does, and it took the tail. The airplane weather-vaned, he caught it. It went again, he caught it again. And then the left main went off the pavement into the shoulder, where there was 2 feet of standing water and 8 decades of frost heave, and the gear folded, and the whole thing swung and went down the embankment at the departure end of runway 5, and out across 60 yards of black rock, and into Kuluk Bay. Nose down, left wing under. It stopped, and it should not have stopped, and I'll tell you why it stopped in a minute. And when you hear why, you'll understand that some things are so stupid and so lucky and so cruel that you cannot design them. I was in the armory. Of course I was. Where else would I have been? I heard the crash phone in Chief's office go off, and I have never heard that phone go off. Not once in 7 months. And Chief came out of that room moving in a way I'd never seen a 54-year-old man move. "Drug," he said. We were on the road in 90 seconds, and the SEALs were ahead of us. They'd been in the hangar closer, and they were already gone, and I remember thinking that they'd left in complete silence, and how strange that was, and how by then it wasn't strange at all. The wind was doing something you can't describe, rain and salt and something granular in it. The truck moved on the road, not slid, moved sideways 4 inches at a time while I had it in gear at 30 miles an hour. Chief said, "Boone, Chief, whatever's out there, don't run at it." Here's what was out there. The airplane was about 140 feet off the rocks, in maybe 11 feet of water at the tail and 4 at the nose, canted over hard to the left. The surge coming into Kuluk Bay that night was running 8 to 12 feet. Understand what that means. The whole thing was disappearing and reappearing. It'd go under, all but the vertical stabilizer, and then the water would drop out from under it, and there'd be a whole airplane sitting in a hole in the sea with foam pouring off it. And it was still there. It hadn't slid into the deep, and it hadn't broken up because of a cable. There was a mooring pendant out on those rocks. Wire rope, 1 inch and 1/8, 19 strands over 7, laid there sometime around 1943 and abandoned sometime around 1946. Running from a dead man block up on the shore out to a buoy anchor that was still down there somewhere under the mud. 60 years of that water and it was still good wire. That's how they made things. The airplane had come down on it, and the left wing had hooked under it. And it had held. It had held that aircraft off the deep water for 4 hours by the time we got there, and it was going to keep holding it, and that was the whole problem. Because the cable had the wing pinned, and the aircraft wanted to right itself. Every time the surge came up under the fuselage, the whole airframe tried to roll level, and the cable held the left wing down, and the fuselage rolled the other way instead, which put the main cabin door under the water. And it put the tail up. 8 people were alive in the tail cone of that aircraft. The captain was not. Doc Pisani got a swimmer line out on the first try. He was in the water for 11 minutes and he came out gray and shaking, and he'd made it 40 feet. The surf on those rocks, you can't. There's no version of it. It wasn't waves, it was a washing machine full of basalt. Ives put a stop to it. He didn't ask Vaught. He put a hand on Pisani's chest and said, "That's enough," and Pisani, who I had watched carry a 200-pound man up a hill for fun, sat down in the rocks and cried like a child. There was no boat. There was one boat on the island that could have gone out, and it was a 32-foot aluminum skiff sitting on a trailer with its lower unit apart. There was no helicopter. The nearest Coast Guard air station was Cold Bay, 430 miles east, and they had launched, and they were going to be 4.5 hours minimum in that weather and might have to turn around. Water temperature, 4 degrees Celsius, 39 Fahrenheit. Air temperature about the same, with 60 knots of wind on it. Vaught had a handheld VHF pressed against his ear inside his hood. And out of it, thin as a wire, came Harold Sniggeroff's voice, saying that the water was up to the seat backs, and there was a girl who was 14 and her name was Maddie, and could somebody please tell her mother. I want to tell you what a commander looks like when there is nothing to do. He looks like a man standing in the rain. That's it, that's all it is. Vought stood on those rocks with 14 of the most capable human beings on Earth around him, and every one of them looking at him, and there was nothing. No move. No angle. The water would not let them in, and it would not let those people out. He said, "Get me options." And Cobb, who had a torn hamstring and had been useless for a week, Cobb who I did not like, Cobb was lying on his belly at the edge of the rocks with a spotting scope, and he had been there for 20 minutes without saying a word, and he said, "The cable, sir." Vought turned. "Cut the cable, the wing floats. She rolls level, door comes up." I've said, "Or she slides." "She won't slide. She's on the bottom at the nose. She's hung, senior, she's not floating, look at her." Cobb hadn't taken his eye off the glass. "The cable's the only thing holding her over. Kill the cable and she stands up." "With what?" Vought said. And that's the moment, right there. Everybody heard it at once and nobody said it, and I looked up and Chief Prout was looking straight at me. Cobb said it. "Sir, there's 650s in that armory. 610 yards. That's what it was, measured after. From the only ground on that whole shoreline that had an angle on the cable, a WWII coastal gun position, a concrete casemate built into the hill above Finger Bay in 1943 by men who thought the Japanese were coming, which they had twice, across the black water, to a 30-foot span of wire rope that came up out of the surf and over a rock and down again. 60 knots of wind, quartering, full value, gusting. Snow in it by then. Dark. And a target that was moving, because it wasn't a static cable. It was a cable under 12,000 pounds of load, with an airplane on the end of it and the North Pacific breathing on it. Every time the surge came in, the tension dropped and the wire rose. Every time the water fell away, it snapped down and sang. Cobb wanted to shoot it. Vought said no. They stood in a concrete room built for men who'd been dead 50 years, with the wind screaming through the embrasure, and Commander Ezra Vought said no twice, and here is why. Because if he authorized a .50 caliber rifle to be fired 600 yards across a rescue scene, with 8 living Americans inside the target's shadow, and one of those rounds skipped off that water and went through the fuselage of that airplane, then he would be a man who had killed a 14-year-old girl named Maddie in order to save her, and everything after that would be a hearing. And I've said, "Sir, in 40 minutes there won't be anybody to hit." Vought stood there, and he took the little green notebook out of his pocket. He had one. They all had one, and I have never understood why until I understood everything else. And he wrote something in it, and he signed it, and he tore it out and put it in Ives's hand. He said, "Get the rifles." I ran. I ran all the way to that armory, and I could not get my key in the lock. My hands were that bad, and Chief did it for me. And she was in there. She'd heard the crash phone. She'd walked over. She was standing in the middle of that concrete room with her coat on and her hood down, and she said, "How many are alive?" 8. "What do they need?" And Chief Prout said, "They're going to shoot the mooring cable off the wing." Alma Reyes stood very still. "What cable?" "Old pendant, 1.1/8, wire rope. 19 by 7. "How the hell would I?" "It's 19 by 7, she said. "Everything out there is." And she was already moving. She went to the rack and she took down number 3, Cobb's rifle, and handed it to me without looking. Then she stopped in front of number 4. She put her hand on it. Chief said, "Alma." "Ammunition," she said. "What have you got?" "Ball case of it." "Ball won't do it." "Alma." "Wade." She turned around, and it was the first time I ever heard her use his name. "Ball will not cut that wire. It'll push it. It'll deform 2 strands and go past. You want to part a 19 by 7 wire rope under load with 1 round, you need something with a core in it. And there is exactly 1 can of that on this island, and it is behind your inner cage, and I am not authorized to open it." Chief Prout looked at her. He got out his keys. We got up to that gun position at 21:14. I know because Ives wrote it down. He wrote everything down that night, on his forearm, in grease pencil, and later he transcribed it, and later still somebody asked for that transcription and got told it had been lost. The casemate was maybe 12 feet deep, concrete, with a slot cut across the front where a 6-inch gun used to sit. Snow was coming through it sideways. Somebody had a headlamp on red. Somebody had put a poncho over the back to break the wind, and it was doing nothing. Cobb went down behind number 3. He'd shot it all week. He knew it like his own hand. Vaught knelt beside him with the radio. Ives ran the dope. I lay behind them holding the ammunition can like it was a baby. And Alma stood at the back of that concrete room with rifle number 4 in her hands, muzzle down, and she did not come forward. Cobb's first round went at 21:19. He called wind at 54 full value left, and he held for it and he sent, and you don't hear a 50 go off in a concrete box so much as you receive it. Something happens in your sinuses. My ears rang for 2 days. Ives was on the glass. Miss left low. Second round, miss high. Third hit. And everybody in that casemate made a sound, and the cable did not part. Fourth round, hit. Fifth hit. Nothing. Cobb rolled off the rifle and he was shaking with it and he said, "I'm on it. Senior, I'm on it, I'm on the wire." "You are," Ives said. He hadn't moved his eye. "You're hitting it." "Then why?" And from the back of the room, quietly, a woman said, "Because you're hitting it in the span." They all turned. Alma came forward. She got down on one knee at the embrasure with the wind coming through it, and she looked out at that black water with no optic, nothing, just her eyes, and she watched for maybe 40 seconds. Then she said, "You can't cut a wire rope in the middle of a free span. It's a rope. It moves out of the way. You have to hit it where it can't move." She pointed. "It comes up over that rock. It's had 60 years of that rock. It's already lost strands there. That's where it's going to fail, and it's going to fail whether we shoot it or not in about a year, and the only question is whether we're here for it." Vaught said, "Can you see the rock?" "No," she said, "nobody can. It's under water, 11 seconds out of 12. Cobb said, "So how?" "It comes out of the water in the trough," Alma said. "It's up for about a second and a half, and it's up on the 7th. I've said the 7th. Waves come in sets, 6 small, 1 big, more or less. It's not a rule, it's a habit." She was still watching the water. "I've been listening to it out my window for 11 days. Here's what she was asking for. A 1.5 second window, once every 90 seconds or so, at 610 yards, in the dark, in snow, in 60 knots of wind, at a target the width of a man's thumb. And you couldn't see the target while you were aiming at it. You had to be already aimed, hold, breathe, sit there, and wait for the sea to hand it to you and send in that second and a half. Which meant the shooter could not do it alone. The shooter had to be told when." Cobb went back down behind the rifle. "Call it," he said. "Senior, call it, I'll send on." "Deke," Ives said. "Call it." "Son, I can't see it either." And they all, every one of them, 14 of the best trained human beings on the surface of the earth, sat in a concrete room and understood the same thing at the same second. Nobody in that casemate could see the rock, but the woman who had been listening to it for 11 days. Alma Reyes could spot. Or Alma Reyes could shoot. There wasn't a third thing. Cobb said, "Ma'am, spot me." And I saw her face. You have to understand, nothing on that woman ever moved. 11 days I had watched a face that did not report anything to anyone. And in that red headlamp light, on one knee, with a rifle in her hands and 8 people drowning in an airplane, Alma Reyes's mouth came apart and her eyes went somewhere and she made a sound. Not a word. A sound. Because she knew what he was asking. He was asking her to lie down 8 feet from another human being in the dark and put a voice in his ear. Up 2 wins 4, going 5 come back to me. He was asking her to be Ren or Holly's. Cobb didn't know, he couldn't have. He'd read a name off a receiver, that's all he had. But Vaught knew. Vaught was on his knees beside that rifle with a radio in his hand and a 14-year-old girl's name in his ear. And I watched the man's entire face collapse for 1/2 of 1 second, and then rebuild itself. Because that's what they do. That's what all of it is for. He said, "Cobb, get off the gun." "Sir." "Get off the gun." Cobb got off the gun. She lay down behind number 4. She did it the way she did everything. She set the bipod. She pulled the stock into her shoulder and rolled the little circle she always rolled, right side, the one that had been rebuilt twice. She put her cheek down on the cheek rest, over the flat of the receiver, over 5 letters and 11 more, and she settled. And Ives put the ammunition where her hand would find it without looking. And nobody said anything. 20 seconds went by. The wind came through that slot in the concrete like something with a purpose. 30. Her finger was not on the trigger. It was laid along the receiver straight, the way you're taught, and it was not moving to the trigger. Vaught leaned in and said, very low, "Alma." She said, "I can't." "You can see it." "I can see it," she said into the stock. "I can see it fine." 40 seconds. "Sir," she said, and her voice was completely steady and completely wrong. "If I put my hand on this trigger, I am going to be good at it." Senior Chief Ives got down on the concrete beside her. He didn't say anything. I counted. I count when I'm nervous. He knelt there for 30 seconds. I counted to 30 and started over, and he didn't put a hand on her and he didn't speak. And outside the sea came in and went out and came in. Then he said, "Ma'am, it's a rope." Nothing happened. The wind, the concrete, the red light. And then Alma Reyes said, so quietly that I don't think anybody heard it but me, because I was directly behind her with the ammunition can. "It's never a rope." And Ives said, "No, ma'am, tonight it is." She said, "Somebody count the sets for me." Cobb said, "I've got them." Out loud, "Don't tell me the number, tell me the ones I don't want, just say no. Say no until it's yes." Cobb lay down 8 feet away in the snow with a spotting scope, a first-class petty officer who had stood in a doorway 2 weeks earlier and asked a woman if she was a machinist, and he put his eye to the glass and he said, "No." The rifle didn't move. "No." The wind gusted and I saw her let it go past. She didn't fight it. She waited it out. "No." I put my hands over my ears and then I took them off, because I wasn't going to not hear this. "No." Alma breathed out. "No." Silence. The sea sucking back off the rocks. Somewhere out in the dark 140 feet from shore, 8 people in a tail cone. And Deke Cobb said, "Yes." The rifle went off. Ives said, "Miss." Alma didn't move. She said, "Where?" 2 inches under the wire. "That's not a miss, that's the rock." She had already loaded. "It's throwing water, Cobb." "Ma'am." "Say it slower this time. You're a beat early." Cobb said, "Ma'am, I'm not sure I." "Yes, you are." And I watched Deke Cobb close his eyes for 1 second in the snow, and open them, and put his face back to the glass. 90 seconds. "No. No. 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 Oh, yes." The second round went at 21:37. I did not see it. I was looking at her. I have thought 1,000 times about the fact that I was looking at the wrong thing, and I have never once been sorry. I saw her hand come off the trigger, and I saw her whole body go loose, the way a body does when the thing is out of it and there is nothing left to hold. And Ives said, in a voice I had never heard from him, "It's parted, it's parted." 60 years of wire let go at once. They heard it on the rocks a third of a mile away, over that wind. Chief Prout was down there and he said it sounded like a rifle shot itself, a crack that came up out of the water, and then a long ringing whip as 300 feet of steel went somewhere. The left wing came up. And the airplane, that whole broken thing, that Saab 340 with a dead captain in the left seat and 8 living people packed into the tail, that airplane stood up. It rolled level. It slid maybe 6 feet and it grounded and it stopped. And the main cabin door came out of the water. Pisani was in the water before anybody told him to. So were 4 other men. They got a line across in 11 minutes, and they took 8 people off that airplane in the dark in 4-degree water with 60 knots on their backs, and every one of them lived. Maddie Iverson, 14 years old, going home to a mother on a deck she hadn't seen in 9 weeks, was the 6th one off. Harold Snigaroff was the last. He would not go before anybody else. He was 56 and his knee was bad, and he stood in the doorway of a sinking airplane and made everyone else go first. And when Doc Pisani got to him, his core temperature was 31 degrees and his heart went into a rhythm it should not have come out of. He came out of it. He was in Anchorage for a month. Verna flew up. He walked out. The captain's name was Robert Del Vincent. He was 49. He had held that airplane straight for 4 seconds longer than any man on earth could have held it, and everybody who got off that tail cone alive that night was alive because of those 4 seconds, and he never knew it. They brought him up 2 days later when the water went down. Vaught went out in the skiff with them. He didn't have to. Nobody asked him to. I want to tell you about the casemate after. It was still snowing through the slot. Nobody had moved. Alma Reyes lay behind that rifle for a long time. Nobody touched her. Then she got up on her knees and she picked up the 2 brass cases out of the concrete, found them by feel in the dark, and she put them in her coat pocket. And she cleared the rifle. Bolt back, chamber checked with her finger, bolt forward, and she rolled it a quarter turn to the left and caught the charging handle with the outside edge of her right hand, and eased it home with 2 fingers on the receiver, like closing a door on a sleeping child. And she put the rifle down on the concrete, square to the wall, parallel, the way she put everything down. She stood up. Commander Vaught said, "Raise." She said, "Sir, I'd like to go home now." And she walked out of that concrete room and down the hill in the dark, alone, into 60 knots of wind, leaning into it about 6 degrees, and none of us said one word. She was off the island in 9 hours. That's the thing I could never make sense of, not for years, not until Vaught told me in a parking lot in Coronado. Because a Coast Guard C-130 finally got in at 6:20 with a medical team, and it went out at 700 with 2 of the injured, and there was 1 seat left. And Alma Reyes was in it with her rucksack and her toolbox and her long black case. She left before Chief woke up. She left before the seals came off the rocks. She left without saying goodbye to me, and I was 22, and I took that personally for about 11 years. And she did not take rifle number 4 with her. She left it. She left it on a bench in that armory, cleaned, oiled, complete, torqued and checked again, with the 2 brass cases from that night standing upright on the towel beside it, and a piece of paper folded once, with 2 words on it, in a hand I'd seen in a little green notebook 100 times. I've still got the paper. It says, "Boone Chamber Ring, AR." That's all. She checked my work on the way out the door. But here's what I didn't know that morning, standing in that armory with a folded piece of paper in my hand. I didn't know she'd flown out because she had to. I didn't know a call had gone from that island to a building in Virginia at 300, from a commander who had just authorized an unauthorized contractor to fire an unauthorized weapon into an unauthorized rescue, and that the call had gone badly, and that a man behind a desk somewhere had said a sentence that ended with the words "she doesn't exist." I didn't know that Ezra Vaught spent the next 6 years of his career on that sentence, and that it cost him a star. And I didn't know, nobody knew, not even him, not for years, what Deke Cobb did. Because Deke Cobb went back to his room that night in the dark, and he sat on the edge of his rack in wet clothes with his boots still on until the sun came up. And then he went and found Senior Chief Ives, and he said, "Senior, I need to know who Hollies is.